The ring was sitting in the kitchen trash can, right on top of the coffee filter and a crumpled paper towel, like it was nothing, like it had always belonged there. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen and stared at it for a long moment. It was my late wife Sandra's engagement ring, a simple gold band with a small oval sapphire, the one I'd saved up 4 months of paychecks to buy back in 1987, the one she'd worn every single day, until the morning she went into the hospital for the last time, and I slipped it off her finger and told her I'd keep it safe. My son-in-law Brock was at the counter, eating cereal, scrolling his phone. He didn't look up. I walked over to the trash can. I reached in. I picked up the ring. I set it on the counter next to his bowl. He glanced at it, then back at his phone. "Oh," he said, "I was going through that box in the hall closet. It was just taking up space." "That's Sandra's ring," I said. "I know what it is, Neil." He said my name like that sometimes. Not Dad, not even the slightly awkward sir he'd used the first few years. Just Neil, flat and short, the way you'd say it to someone who was mildly in your way. I picked the ring up and put it in my shirt pocket. I went back upstairs to the room I'd been staying in for the past 3 weeks, my own house, the house I'd paid off in 2009, the house where my daughter Cassie had grown up. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I held that ring in my palm, and I thought about Sandra. She died in March of 2021. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. We'd been married 34 years. The house had felt like a museum after she was gone, and I'll be honest, I wasn't doing well. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping. My daughter called every few days, and eventually she said, "Dad, just come stay with us for a while. We have the room. It'll be good for all of us." I said yes, because I missed her, and because the silence in that house was starting to feel like something with weight. That was 3 years ago. I should back up because I want you to understand what I gave these people. Not out of self-pity, I just want you to have the full picture. When I moved into Cassie and Brock's house in Marietta, Georgia, they were behind on almost everything. Brock had lost a sales job right around the same time the pandemic hit and hadn't quite found his footing. Cassie was working part-time as a dental hygienist, 3 days a week, which wasn't enough to cover daycare for their 2 kids, plus the mortgage, plus 2 car payments. They were quiet about it the way people are quiet about things they're ashamed of, but I could see it. I've been a numbers person my whole life, 31 years as a commercial loan officer, and I know what financial stress looks like on a household. So I helped. I covered 3 months of mortgage payments when they fell behind. I paid off Cassie's car because it had a terrible interest rate, and I just couldn't look at it anymore. I paid for both grandkids to go to a proper preschool. I bought the groceries most weeks. I didn't ask to be paid back. I didn't want to be. They were family, and Sandra would have done the same. What I did want, what I thought was a reasonable thing to expect, was basic respect. Brock and I had never been close. He's one of those men who treats every room like a competition he's already won, which gets old fast, but in those first months he was at least cordial. Grateful even, when he thought about it. He thanked me for the mortgage payments. He shook my hand. That changed slowly. The way water wears down stone, you don't see it happening. And then one day you put your hand on the rock and it's smooth where it used to be rough. It started small. He'd turn the TV to something else when I was watching it. He'd make plans for the house, painting the living room, replacing the back fence without mentioning them to me, even though I was paying for things that made those renovations possible. He'd correct me in front of the grandkids. Actually, Neil, that's not how you spell that. That kind of thing. Cassie saw it and didn't see it. She's my daughter, and I love her, but she'd been with Brock for 12 years, and she'd learned a long time ago to smooth things over rather than name them. When I tried to bring it up once gently, she said, "Dad, he just has a certain way. He doesn't mean anything by it." I let it go. I kept letting it go. Then, this past September, my sister called from up in Knoxville to tell me that our childhood home, the house our parents had lived in until they passed, the one we'd grown up in on Beechwood Drive, was finally going through probate and would be transferred to me and my sister jointly. It wasn't worth a fortune. Old house, small lot, needed work. But my sister didn't want to deal with it, and she offered to sign her half over to me for a nominal amount. $20,000. Just to keep it tidy legally. I was going to accept. I was already thinking about what I might do with it, maybe fix it up, maybe sell it eventually, maybe just have somewhere to go that felt like home. Sandra and I had spent our first Thanksgiving as a married couple in that house. My mother had taught me to make biscuits in that kitchen. There was a pencil mark on the doorframe of the second bedroom where my parents had measured my height every year until I was 16. I mentioned it at dinner one night, not as an announcement, just as conversation. My sister and I were working out the details, I said, and it looked like the Beechwood house was coming to me. Brock looked up from his plate. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "Probably fix it up a little. See how I feel." He nodded slowly, the way he does when he's processing something and deciding how he wants to respond. "You know," he said, "Cassie and I have been talking about needing more space. The kids are getting older. We could all move up there. You'd have your own part of the house, we'd have ours. It would make sense financially." I looked at Cassie. She was looking at her plate. "I'll think about it," I said. I didn't sleep well that night. Over the next few weeks, Brock brought it up 3 more times. Each time the idea had evolved slightly. The first time it was a casual suggestion. The second time he'd already looked up the property on Zillow and told me what he thought renovations would cost. The third time he mentioned that his mother might come stay for a few months too, just while she was between apartments, and that the layout of the Beechwood house would work well for everybody. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. A low-grade alertness. The feeling that someone was moving pieces around the board while I was looking the other way. The thing that broke it open happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I'd been out running errands, and when I came back, I went upstairs to my room to put some things away. On the shelf above the desk, I keep a small wooden box, cedar, with a brass clasp that has some of Sandra's things in it. Her watch, a letter she wrote me when I was traveling for work, and we were first married. A few photos. And her engagement ring, which I'd taken to keeping in there since we'd moved it out of the hall closet. The box was on the desk instead of the shelf. The clasp was open. I stood there for a moment. Then I opened it. The ring was there. Everything was there. But it had been moved around. I could tell, the way you can tell when someone's been through your things. The photos were in a different order. The letter was folded differently. I went downstairs. Brock was at the kitchen table with his laptop. Cassie was picking up the kids. "Were you in my room?" I asked. He didn't look up. "I was looking for the extra phone charger. I thought you might have had one." "You went through Sandra's box." He looked up then. "I moved it to get to the drawer. I didn't go through it." The clasp was open. "Neil." He leaned back in his chair. "I barely touched it. I don't know why you're making this into a thing." I stood there, and I looked at him, really looked at him, and I thought about Sandra. About the ring in the trash can. About the dinners and the mortgage and the car payment, and 3 years of my son-in-law treating my dead wife's memory like a minor inconvenience. "You need to be more careful," I said, quietly, and I went back upstairs. That night I lay in the dark, and I did something I hadn't done in a while. I made a list. Not on paper. In my head, the way I used to do with loan files. Just the facts. Just the numbers. Just the situation as it actually was. Fact, I owned the Beechwood house. Brock assumed he was going to live in it. Fact, I was living in my daughter's house, but I had been funding a significant portion of the household for 3 years. Fact, I had no legal agreement with anyone about anything. Everything I'd given was a gift. Fact, I was 63 years old, in good health, with a paid-off house in Marietta that I'd contributed to heavily, and a retirement account that was in reasonable shape. Fact, no one had asked me what I wanted, not once. I called my attorney, Phil Greer, the next morning. We'd worked together for years. He'd handled my estate planning after Sandra died. I told him the situation. He listened without interrupting. which is one of the things I've always valued about Phil. You want to protect the Beechwood property, he said when I finished. I want to understand my options, I said. He walked me through them. Because I was taking title to Beechwood directly, with my sister's transfer, it was straightforward. It would be solely in my name. No one else had any claim to it. Any future decisions about who lived there, what it was used for, or what happened to it were mine alone. And the Marietta house? I asked. That was more complicated. Legally, it was in Cassie's name. I had no title interest. Whatever I'd contributed over the past 3 years was, as far as the law was concerned, a gift. There was no lien, no promissory note, nothing. I figured as much, I said. I spent the next 2 weeks paying attention differently, not looking for reasons to be angry. I want to be clear about that. I was looking for clarity. I wanted to know if I was misreading the situation. I wanted to be fair. What I saw in those 2 weeks? Brock came home one afternoon with paint samples for the Beechwood house. He put them on the kitchen table like he was showing me options for a decision we were making together. He mentioned, casually, that he'd already talked to a contractor up in Knoxville about the roof. He told his mother, on a phone call I overheard from the hallway, that the family house was coming through and that they'd probably be up there by spring. And Cassie, my daughter, my girl, who I had loved since the moment I held her in the hospital at 6:43 in the morning on April 9th, 1988. Cassie said nothing. She heard him talk about my house like it was a done thing, and she said nothing. I called Phil again. I want to move forward with the Beechwood title, I said, and I want to talk about something else. What I did next, I did quietly, and I did carefully, and I did not tell anyone until it was done. I accepted the title to the Beechwood house in my name only. I had Phil draft a proper estate document specifying that the property was to remain in my sole ownership during my lifetime, with specific bequest instructions that I'll keep private. I also had him draw up a simple accounting, not for any legal purpose, just for my own peace of mind, of what I had contributed to the Marietta household over the past 3 years, the mortgage payments, the car, the groceries, the childcare. It came to just over $94,000. I did not ask for any of it back. What I did do was this. I gave Cassie and Brock 60 days' notice that I would be moving out of their home, formal, in writing, hand-delivered. Not because I was required to. Because I wanted it to be real and I wanted it on paper. I also informed them that my financial contributions to the household would end at the same time. I said none of this in anger. I wrote it clearly and simply. I slid the envelope under Cassie's hand while she was sitting at the kitchen table, and I said, I need you to read that, not right now, when you have a quiet minute. Then I went upstairs and I started packing. Cassie came to my room about an hour later. She stood in the doorway holding the letter. Dad, she said. I know, I said. This isn't, we didn't. She stopped, started again. Is this because of Brock? It's because of a lot of things, I said. And it's not a punishment. I'm not angry with you, Cassie. I'm just done living in a situation that doesn't work for me. Where are you going to go? Beechwood, I said. I'm going to fix it up a little, live there for a while. It feels right. She was quiet for a long moment. I kept folding shirts into the suitcase. He thinks he's going to live there, she said finally. He's already made plans. I know he has, I said. Those were his plans, not mine. She sat down on the edge of the chair by the window. She looked young suddenly, not young like a child, but young like someone who has just understood something they wish they'd understood sooner. I should have said something, she said. When he threw away the ring, I saw that. I didn't say anything. No, I said. You didn't. That's all I said about it. Not to punish her, just because it was true, and we both knew it. The confrontation with Brock came the next morning. He came into the kitchen while I was making coffee, and he had a letter in his hand, and he was already talking before he was fully through the door. You can't just decide this unilaterally, he said. We've been planning. You've been planning, I said. I haven't agreed to anything. You let us talk about it for weeks. You let us think. I let you talk, I said. That's different from an agreement. He set the letter on the counter. He looked at me the way men like Brock look at you when they're used to winning things, like the outcome is already settled and you're just being slow to see it. What does Cassie get, he asked, out of your estate, from Beechwood? And there it was. Not how do we fix this, not I'm sorry, not even a real argument, just the asset question. That fast. That's between Cassie and me, I said, and our attorneys. He started to say something else and I held up one hand. Not dramatically, just enough. And I said, I'm going to finish my coffee. He left the room. I finished my coffee. I drove up to Knoxville 11 days later. The Beechwood house needed work, but not as much as I'd feared. The bones were good. My father had built it well, bought good lumber, used a real contractor back in 1971 when you could still find them. The kitchen was dated. The master bathroom was a project. The floors, though, were original hardwood, and when I got down on one knee in the front room and looked at the grain, I could see where my mother had worn a path between her chair and the window she liked to sit by. I hired a local crew. I stayed in a short-term rental nearby for 8 weeks while they worked. I drove over a morning with coffee and spent a few hours walking through, making decisions, watching the thing I'd grown up in become something I could live in again. I had Sandra's ring cleaned and reset. A jeweler in Knoxville took it in for me, cleaned the setting, tightened the prongs. When I brought it back, I put it on the windowsill in the bedroom while I worked, right where the light came through the blinds in the afternoon. It looked good there. Cassie called about once a week. The conversations were careful at first, then less careful. She told me, about a month in, that Brock had been blindsided by the financial change, that without my contributions they were having to restructure things significantly. I said I was sorry to hear that, and I meant it in the way you mean it when something is genuinely hard, but was also genuinely necessary. He blamed me, she said, for not convincing you. I let that sit for a moment. You couldn't have convinced me of something I'd already decided, I said. That's not your fault. I know, she paused. I'm starting to see some things more clearly, Dad. I didn't push it. I just said I was glad to hear that, and I meant it fully. The house was done by mid-January. I moved in on a Saturday morning, just me, my truck, and the things I'd kept in storage since Sandra died. Her good china, which I'd been carrying around in boxes for 4 years, my father's tools from the garage, some furniture we'd bought together early in our marriage that I'd never been able to part with. I set up the living room the way I wanted it. I put Sandra's photos on the mantel, 3 of them in the good frames I'd kept. I put her ring in the cedar box and the cedar box on the shelf above my desk where it belongs. I made dinner that first night. Chicken, rice, green beans with almonds, things I'd cooked with Sandra 100 times. I sat at the kitchen table and ate alone and looked at the familiar lines of the room and the original paint color my parents had chosen in 1974 that nobody had ever bothered to change, and I thought, this is fine. This is more than fine. I wasn't happy in the triumphant way people probably want me to be. I wasn't gloating. I was just quiet. And that quiet felt different from the quiet the Marietta house had after Sandra died. That one had weight, had absence in it. This one just felt like mine. My daughter called that evening, late. You in? She said. I'm in, I said. How does it look? Like home, I said. Like it always did. She cried a little. I'd let her. And then she said something I've thought about since. Lying in bed in the room my parents used to sleep in the house my father built. She said, I'm sorry I didn't protect what mattered, Dad. I should have. You're learning, I said. That's enough. I want you to know, if you're out there listening to this and you're in a situation where you've been quietly funding someone else's life while they plan around you like you're a resource instead of a person, you are allowed to change the terms. Not with noise. Not with an ultimatum or a scene. just quietly, carefully, with a clear head and good documentation and a phone call to someone you trust. You are allowed to choose yourself, even at 63. Especially at 63. Sandra used to say that the bravest thing a person could do was decide, without asking anyone's permission, what they were no longer willing to accept. She said it about other people's situations, the way you do when you're watching someone from the outside. But she was right. She usually was. The sapphire ring is on the windowsill this morning. The light is coming through just like it did yesterday. I've got coffee on, and I'm not going anywhere. I don't choose to go. That's the whole story, and honestly, that's enough. The ring is on the windowsill right now. I can see it from where I'm sitting. That small oval sapphire catches the morning light the same way it did when I first put it on Sandra's finger 37 years ago. In a parking lot outside a restaurant because I couldn't wait until dessert. I think about that a lot lately, how some things hold their shape no matter what gets thrown at them. I didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. I want to be honest about that. What I did because I finally understood something that had been true for a long time. The way people treat what you love tells you everything about how they see you. When Brock dropped that ring into the kitchen trash like it was a dead battery, he wasn't being careless. He was telling me exactly where I stood, and I think, on some level, I'd known it for a while and kept choosing not to see it. That's the part that stays with me. Not what he did, what I allowed to continue after I already knew. I spent 31 years as a loan officer. I know how to read a situation. I know how to look at the numbers and understand what they're actually saying. But I applied none of that clarity to my own life for nearly 3 years because it was easier to call it family and keep writing the checks. I told myself I was being generous. I was being something closer to avoidant. Real generosity comes from a place of clear eyes and free choice. What I was doing came from a place of grief and loneliness, and not wanting to admit that the arrangement I was living in had nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with my wallet. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's being willing to apply what you know to situations where the truth is uncomfortable. I had to sit with that one for a while. And then there's the question of what it takes to actually move. To draft the letter. To call Phil. To pack the suitcase. For a long time, I think I told myself I was being patient, being the bigger person, keeping the bees. But patience without any intention behind it isn't a virtue. It's just waiting. What I finally found, after too long, was the difference between enduring something and deciding something. Those are not the same thing. One happens to you. The other is yours. Cassie said she was sorry she hadn't protected what mattered. I believe her, and I believe she's going to have to make some hard decisions of her own, in her own time, that I can't make for her. That's not cold. That's just true. You can love someone completely and still understand that their growth is their own business. My job now is to be someone worth coming back to, when she's ready. The Beechwood house smells like old wood and fresh paint, and something I can't name that has always just been home. I made biscuits last Sunday from my mother's recipe, the one she taught me in that same kitchen 50 years ago. They weren't perfect, they were pretty close. Sandra used to say that the life you actually want doesn't show up until you stop making room for the life you've been settling for. I think she was right. She usually was.